From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's Just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
His social gyros was off the gimbals.
If you've got a tip for Melissa, that snippet of news that triggered a memory, something your drunk uncle said in an unguarded moment, whether the smell of fear is more sweet or savory, anything, tell us about it by calling the Tipster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837, or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. And now here's your host. Nothing depresses her more than an unsolved case, or when the Ugg boots she ordered are the wrong size, Melissa Morgan.
More cowbell. They weren't the wrong size, Producer Mark. They were the right size. They just were not comfortable, and that's really, that doesn't happen.
They're the size you always get from Ugg, and they didn't fit, so it's the wrong size.
Well,
they messed up.
I couldn't even get my foot in them. I felt like a really weird fat Cinderella.
You're not. You've got how many pairs of
23.
And they all are the same size.
Yeah.
From Ugg. So they on this particular model,
these are just badly designed, and I couldn't get my.
Yeah.
It's not, and my feet are actually like a smaller part of me. They're not like, trying to get my butt or something into something. It's just, yeah.
Yes, your feet, your legs and your feet are gorgeous.
Oh, thank you. The rest of me is all shitty.
No, the rest of you is beautiful, but your legs and your feet are very. I mean, you could model with them.
Oh, yes.
You could.
Like if the Fred Flintstone line of.
Oh, stop.
Okay. Shoes made of rock. No.
Stop.
The only thing I'm delighted about with my feet and legs is that I don't have cankles. I don't have large ankles for a large person. I've always had like small, I call them polar bear feet. Like polar bears have little tiny feet and like great big bodies. My feet aren't tiny. I wear a size 9, but
yeah, but they look great. And your legs,
thanks,
your
weird
legs
foot fetishist. Thank you.
I'm not a foot fetishist.
You're the sweetest weirdo.
Okay.
In the whole world. So producer Mark and I were watching in case you're wondering about the intro and thought that maybe I suffered a head trauma. Producer Mark and I were watching a crime show, and this officer described a guy that he had interviewed as his social gyro was off the gimbals. And I stopped and said, I turned to Mark and I was like, "What did I hear? Did I hear what I thought of?"
And I said yes, but I have no idea what it means.
I thought it was like a very common phrase, and producer Mark would be able to tell me what it meant. And I had to look up. Actually, I think you looked up.
I did. I looked up gimbals. Yeah.
I was like, is this a department store in New York? It's spelled differently. And producer Mark can explain, I guess,
gimbals are things that help balance out things like gyroscopes. Yeah. And okay.
So this detective was like, I would have loved to have talked to him, except the case was not anything I wanted to talk about. But yeah, the fact that he just offhandedly throws out in an interview, his social gyro was off the gimbals. I thought he might, and it was Florida. It wasn't Kentucky. I was like, he might be from Kentucky, but no.
It's funny. It was Florida.
It was Florida,
where everything is off the gimbals.
All their social gyros are just running free in the street. So this episode is different for me because it has a lot in it, and it probably could be a multi-part, except that the murderer was only convicted of one murder, even though he's sort of widely considered a serial killer, and I think you'll understand why when we get into it. But I want to say this quote from William S. Burroughs: "Nobody owns life, but anyone who can pick up a frying pan owns death." Now,
that's good.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
It reminds me, I mean, I'm sure people have been murdered with frying pans. In fact, I know Lee Jennings in Indiana was murdered by Charles Stevie Stevenson, Bill and Peggy Stevenson's nephew. He murdered her with her frying pan and a pepper mill. I think the pepper mill is the part that I always hang on to, because I think a frying pan seems always like cartoonish. Like you would see like Bugs Bunny.
Right,
boing. Yeah. But the victim, the one victim that this murderer was convicted of, was killed with his own frying pan and later stabbed, but he rendered him, unconscious with his own frying pan. So that quote from William S. Burroughs is succinct, and yet is it doesn't sound like a creepy warning, but it does make me think. It does make me stop and think that, nobody owns life. We own our own lives, but someone could take our life if they, have a frying pan or the mindset to do so. And the thing that dawns on me, and it's not that it hasn't dawned on me in the past, but I can find myself when researching these cases wrapped up in my own vengeance. I want to get vengeance. It propels me forward, but it sometimes bothers me. And I have to remember, podcasts don't solve crimes. Law enforcement solves crimes. The best that things like this, podcasts or blogs or television shows about a case, the best we can do, in my mind, is be a witness to someone's loved one's story, to their life. We can be a witness to their lives. And in this case, it's even more difficult because the one person who was murdered, we know about him. He had his life was, somewhat in the spotlight, and he was very well known in New York City. But there are 6 men who have never been identified. 6 men were murdered in the 70s the same way, disposed of in the same way, and they've never been identified. So the vengeance part of me becomes bigger sometimes than the witness part of me. And I try to remember. It's not like I need to remember my place. Sometimes I just need to remember the witness part. That's my job, is to be a witness to someone's family member who is no longer with us and may have been taken in a very, very bad way. So I know that there are lots of stories about curses on film sets, typically involving someone who may have been, injured or hurt or even lost their life on a film set. This film set is pretty interesting. There are apparently nine instances of people dying or having very severe injuries. And I'm not, saying I believe in this so much, but the film set is The Exorcist. Everyone from crew members who died unexpectedly, including like a special effects person, as well as security guard, actor Jack McGowan. Linda Blair's grandfather died during the filming. Ellen Burstyn actually suffered a permanent spinal injury.
Wow, I knew none of this.
Yeah, when she was being thrown off of her daughter Reagan's bed. There's actually a scream in the film, and that's her real scream.
Oh my God.
Yeah. The setting, even though this was supposed to have taken place in Washington, D.C., it was filmed in New York. And the setting for the McNeil house actually burned down. And the only thing that was left was Reagan's bedroom.
Okay.
Yeah.
I knew none of this.
Yeah, there's a whole lot that went on to even get the film out. And in fact, a Jesuit priest was brought to the set. A real priest, not an actor, brought to the set to bless the set because things were so. But Paul Bateson, this handsome guy, was born in 1940 and he grew up in Pennsylvania. And his father was a metallurgist, which I had to look up because I didn't know what they did. They're scientists that extract metals and alloys, and their interest is in, how to make metal more profitable for industry. And Paul felt that his father was too strict and he wouldn't let him go to Saturday movies, and he would make him stay home and listen to the opera. And he, this is something he's used in his confessions and in different interviews as the impetus for why he became who he was. And I still have a hard time with nature versus narcissism. I'm not sure if you're born into this and you come into life, but he lists several things that made him who he was. So he joined the army, and that's where he started drinking heavily. He was stationed in Germany, and he really quickly became an alcoholic. He got discharged after a short stint and moved to New York. And he had a relationship with a man, although he is it's so very difficult for him to say he's a gay man. He describes himself, I'm not exclusively gay. Okay, Paul, that's fine. Be whatever you want to be. How about you don't kill people? How about you don't exclusively be a murderer? So he had a 5-year relationship, and they were, everything was going well. They had lots of parties at their home and in New York. They had a weekend place in Fire Island. And then about 5 years into this relationship, and maybe these would be called stressors if you're a criminal analyst of, if you work for the BAU and you like to profile people. But 5 years into this relationship with this other man that he, everything was going fine. His mom died very quickly of a stroke, and then his younger brother committed suicide. And he wandered around for a little bit, but he got himself into training as a neurological radiological technician. And he was really, really good at this. And he broke up with his boyfriend and moved to a Brooklyn neighborhood called Borough Park. And he quickly got a job after training at New York University Medical Center, which is not, not for nothing. It's a pretty, beloved, established medical center.
Very respected, yep.
Yeah, at least in the time in the 70s. And he was extremely well-liked and respected by his colleagues. And he was really good at what he did. So 1972, William Friedkin is like, I am taking William Peter Blatty's novel, The Exorcist, and I'm making a movie. And I want to add a scene where little Reagan, played by Linda Blair, is having some medical tests because they can't explain, what's going on with her behavior, i.e. the devil. So he actually shows up he knows a doctor, Dr. Lane, Dr. Barton Lane, who invites him to the center, even though it's supposed to be taking place in D.C. He invites him to the New York University Medical Center to observe something called a cerebral angiography. So these angiographies were, at the time, performed by going into the patient's carotid artery in the front of the neck. You put a catheter in, and then there's, dye or contrast agent, so they can see your blood vessels and how they're working, under X-ray kind of situations. So it was kind of barbaric, quite frankly. And to know how to do it correctly was extremely important. There's blood that comes out of the end of the tube because it's mimicking your heartbeat. It's showing how your heart is working. And William Friedkin was really impressed with the whole thing that he got to see. He got to observe this whole procedure. And he said, I want everyone who was here to be on camera when we shoot this scene.
Oh, so Friedkin was there to basically do research for the movie, for the scene he wanted to do.
Yep.
And once he saw it all, he was so impressed. He said, I just want to use everybody that's here when I film the scene.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
I want to use the nurse. I want to use Paul Bateson, who's the radiological technician. And I want to put this on camera, on film. And it's apparently, other than her head spinning around, it's a scene that a lot of people remember because it's so realistic. There are, cinephiles who still believe that it is one of the more fascinating scenes. And to this day, medical professionals are like, that is so expertly done in a film. It's really spectacular. And Paul Bateson was a big part of that. He's the person who kind of talks most in the scene. He's, talking to Reagan. He's like, okay, Reagan, I'm going to scoot you down the table. Can you move over a little bit? Thank you. That's good. This is going to hurt. And you see a close-up of Linda Blair wincing. And he's like, but it's just for a minute. He apparently was really good with kids who had this very difficult procedure, if you're an adult, it's a difficult procedure, but as a kid, something this, scary, and, they hold your head with straps so that you can't move, and it's still, really scary. And there's this, tight close-up of Linda Blair's face, and then there's, they show so realistically, there's blood spurting, that stains her little surgical gown, and that's exactly what William Friedkin saw when he saw the procedure. And there's Paul Bateson, whose voice is heard off camera, I know this is going to hurt, but it's just for a second, and it's just, So he was obviously really good at what he did. So the movie was released in 1973, and I just have to say, on hindsight, I was not Linda Blair's age. She must be several years older than me. But I remember the night that my mom went with her best friend Judy to see The Exorcist. I'm like, I don't know, 8 or 9 or something. And I think Reagan was supposed to be 12 in the film. And I remember our neighbor Angela was my babysitter. And I remember waking up and my mom was standing in my bedroom staring at me over my bed, and I'm I'm like, hi. And she's like, hi, okay, go back to sleep. And she didn't tell me till years later. I looked so much like Linda Blair. I had long, straight brown hair, parted in the middle. I wore little nightgowns like she did. Here's my mom, this single mother raising this crazy bitch child. And she just goes to see The Exorcist. And I told her a lot of stuff as a kid. Let me just tell you, I had I just want to go on record now. I am not possessed that I am aware of. You shut the fuck up, producer Mark.
Wait, I have a question. I know you like Ouija boards at some point. Were you playing with Ouija boards at the time?
No, I was too young. I liked them later on. I was really only like 8 or 9 when this came out, but I was tall for my age. I was very tall, and I looked older, and I think my mom was just startled by the resemblance. But when I was a kid, and all kids have this, I think if you don't squash it, or if an adult doesn't quash it in you, you have, I don't want to call it a second sight. I don't know what to call it, but you have things happen, whether it's you have an imaginary, play friend, or you see things. I mean, there were a lot of unexplained things in our household. And my mother was, quite frankly, whatever I had going on, my mom was like 1,000 times, more, I don't want to say powerful. I'm describing myself like a witch. Anyway.
You're not a witch, but I know you always poo-poo it, but you do have much more of the ability to see things that most of us don't. You may say we all have the ability,
we do.
but most people don't access it, or don't have clear access to it. I know I don't. And
if I knew how to access it, brother, I would access it, because I would just be telling everyone who killed people. I'd be figuring out who the murderers were. Whatever gift I had, I would be using it. But my mom had, incidents that were just, when I got older and understood what the words were, I'd be like, are you psychic? And she would say, no, I'm just very aware. That's what she would say. She would never admit she was psychic. And I don't mean she sat around with like a crystal ball and had cards and shit. She just would say things and things would happen, and she knew things that there's no way she could know. But she's convinced that one evening in that tween time, probably 11, 12, because we lived on Mills Road in Taylor Mill, and it was a big 2-story house. She yelled at me about something. I was in trouble for something, and I stomped into the den, which was my little, like, at the time would have been like a man cave. It had built-in bookshelves, and the previous owner was a carpenter, and there were beautiful touches in this house. And it's still standing on Mills Road. They've done some work to it. It's a little different now, but it's still there. And I stomped into the den, and she had like folded my arms and, sat down and pouted. And she heard rocks being thrown at the house from outside. Now, she said I don't remember this, but she told me years later, she's like, I got up and went into the den and was like, are you doing that? And she said, I just sat there and just glared at her and wouldn't answer. I have no recollection of throwing rocks from outside with my telekinesis.
Yeah, but you probably were.
I don't know. I really have no idea. But the one that I absolutely have no memory of this one was pretty interesting because my grandparents backed it up. When my mother left my father, she was 8 months pregnant with me, and she moved back in with my grandparents. And they also lived on Mills Road. And they had a little addition added onto their house. So Mom and I had a bedroom across the hall from each other and a little bathroom in the hallway. And I was like 3 and I still remember this bedroom set because I loved it. It was very large wood, and it was, at this point in time, it would have been considered shabby chic. It was like painted like a pretty antique white. It was very beautiful. And it had big posters, like it didn't have like a canopy on top, but it had 4 big tall posters and a big solid wood frame, and it had a nightstand, and I had I wouldn't really call it I guess I had a dresser, but the thing I remember directly across from my bed was my bookshelf that matched it, because I had all my dolls on my bookshelf. So we lived there until I was 5 or 6, but I was apparently 3. And my mom said at 3 a.m, she hears scrape, 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 scrape. And she gets up and tries to open my door. And she can't open the door because all of my furniture has moved and is pushed against the door. All of my heavy pine wood furniture. And I'm in the corner, huddled in the corner, speaking a language that she said she can't decipher, but she said the closest she could figure out was that it sounded like it was French.
No, you don't have any powers at all. You don't
That's
have
not
any,
a power. Maybe I was having a nightmare. Anyway, just let me finish. Let me finish.
God.
My grandparents, she goes and wakes up my grandparents, and my grandfather has to come and take tools to take the door off the hinges to open because he can't push open the door because the furniture's too heavy for a grown man and a grown woman to push open. So he has to take the door off the hinges. And this is an old house. I still remember those beautiful glass doorknobs. Anyway, they take the door off the hinges, move my furniture back, put me in bed, and I have no recollection. She said I woke up the next morning and was like, where's my door? And like I had zero recollection of that happening.
Okay.
I think kids do shit like this all the time. And I'm not possessed.
I think
I've told.
No. I think that there are telekinetic powers, especially with adolescents.
Yeah.
The more when I remember, I had one experience.
Yes, that's
like
right.
That.
You did.
I did when I was a kid. I was like in my teens. I'm gonna guess I was probably 16, probably or so. We lived in Cupertino, and I had my own bedroom. And I had, music posters up all open, because plastered. There was no wall space, right? It was just all posters of my favorite bands and Elton John and Chicago and all these other guys. And I woke up one morning and somebody had somebody had taken all of the posters and just completely twisted them sideways and
re-put them back.
They'd been tacked back up, but all slanted and out of place. And I didn't say anything to anybody about it at the time. I just thought, okay, I either did that in my sleep or I can't imagine I did that all in my sleep because it would have taken so long to do. Like I don't think there were enough hours in the night for me to do all the stuff that was done. It was very weird.
It couldn't have been one of your shitty brothers.
No, I don't. Because I
think you locked the door.
I locked the door.
Yeah.
I had my own lock on the door.
That's what I was thinking. It was just one of your shitty younger brothers.
No. They wouldn't have done that. No.
They're probably not that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, I'm an only child, so I don't have any siblings to blame it on. And I was 3. And it's not like I was a strong baby. Like, I don't remember being able to push furniture around. In fact, I can barely move now. So that was just an interesting thing. And I swear I'm not possessed by the devil. I think, as far as you people know, I think it happens a lot in kids' lives. I think kids have, that's why like poltergeist and, fire starter, things like that. I mean, maybe you're growing into being, whatever you are, and you have things you aren't sure how to, how they work, and you put them together and they become more powerful than you think. And producer Mark is right. Typically the things that move happen when you're older. A lot of it happens in the teen years. I'm sure we've all seen movies, etc. So The Exorcist, I think, made a big impression on my mom. And she, was a little worried that, my head was going to spin around or something. But it faded. There are other stories, which we'll talk about another time. But I'm sure most people have these weird things that have happened as a kid, right? So, the movie comes out in 1973, and you would think that this would have made a good thing out of Paul Bateson's life. But he started drinking heavily again. Over the years, he had gone back and forth to Alcoholics Anonymous, and then he would be sober for a while, and then he would fall off the wagon again. And unfortunately, just 2 years after the movie was released, and he was so lauded for his, small, short, but important role, they ended up firing him from NYU Medical Center because, in his own words, he said, nobody likes a drunk. So he got odd jobs. He was apparently very good with tools, and he did some repair work. He cleaned apartments in Greenwich Village. He took tickets at a porno theater, and he started going to AA meetings again. And he was pretty successful, for a while. And he found himself attempting to recover with other gay men and was really just hoping to start another long-term relationship, in his own words. In 1977, he had fallen off the wagon again and was drinking more heavily than ever. He would drink at least a quart of vodka a day. And he said that it made him very passive, is how he said. And he said, I would take a few shots, I'd get up, I'd get dressed, I would shave, I thought I was going to go out, but then the vodka left me with no energy to move. But there were nights that he was able to go out, and he really enjoyed going to leather bars, which were becoming very popular in the 70s in New York. And he sort of related to, they were called bikers. And he said, leather boys impress me. In contrast, he didn't like drag queens. He said they give gays a bad name. Like any extreme group would, is what he said, his exact quote. And it's like, okay. So this reporter for Variety, who covered film reviews and all sorts of articles in the film industry in New York, Addison Verrill. Now, I'm saying Verrill, but it's only because I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his name, and I can't find any place where it's verbalized. It could be Verrill, but to me, his first name's Addison, so I'm going to call him Addison Verrill, who was this reporter and reviewer for films for Variety, went to a bar on September 13th, 1977, and met a man. He went to Badlands, and then he met the man there, and then they had gone to the Mine Shaft, and then to the Anvil. And the Mine Shaft was a bar where Addison Verrill would hold court because he was, well known in the New York literati world because of his reviews and his, writing for Variety and about film. So on September 14th of 1977, Addison Verrill is found dead in his apartment on Horatio Street. It looks like there's been a struggle. He has been beaten and stabbed. They don't exactly know what happened. Nothing of real value was taken. There's a few things you'll find out later that were taken, but the things that you would take if this was just a robbery of someone who you wanted their items and you wanted to sell them, the TV, the VCR, those things are all there. There's a couple of empty beer cans, a couple of half-full glasses with alcohol in them. There's white substance on the floor that they can't quite figure out what it is, which we'll find out what it is later. And they don't release the police, the NYPD, do not release the details of what happened, but they know there's no forced entry. He likely let his killer into the apartment. So Arthur Bell, who is a friend of Addison Verrill and a gay activist and who writes for the Village Voice, he decides to write an article because he is seeing this. He's seeing it from the macro. As a gay man, he's seeing that largely the murders of gay men in a big city don't go investigated very deeply. Even if it's not where they died of an overdose by themselves or with someone else, if they're murdered, it's just usually seen as like, oh, you know what, this was a sexual encounter that went wrong. This was, sex for pay that didn't go well. It just, it wasn't, and I'm hoping it's not the same today, but you never know, right? I guess it depends on the area. I'm shocked in New York, even in the 70s, that this wasn't considered a bigger deal, and you'll see why, because it's heartbreaking. So Arthur Bell writes this article in the Village Voice, and he leaves, like we all do, at the end of our podcasts or blogs, we leave a phone number for the correct law enforcement agency if anyone knows of any information about a case, right? And he says, if you have any information, please call NYPD. And 8 days after Addison Verrill is murdered, someone calls Arthur Bell. And he says, I liked your story and I like the way you write, but I'm not a psychopath.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Now, what the person who claims to be the killer said to Arthur Bell, some of it is the details that only the killer would know, and some of it he tries to soft sell his involvement and try and make it seem that he's a different person than who it probably was, which is, I think, in all likelihood, it's Paul Bateson. But he tells Arthur Bell, I'm gay and I needed money because I'm an alcoholic. And I had been sober for 3 months. And then I went to Badlands and then I met Addison Verrill. He propositioned me and I was like, okay. We went back to his apartment. We had some beer. We had some cocaine. We had sex. Now here's the part where it would have to be the person who was there. We used Crisco as a lubricant, and that is the white substance on the floor that the police officers didn't know what it was. And he said, when we were at the bar, I didn't know, when we were at the different bars, I didn't know that he was like, this superstar because he's like behind the scenes, but it was sort of, exciting to go home with this guy. I told him I needed money and he didn't give me any. And it wasn't just the rejection of the money. I felt he wasn't reciprocal as far as the sex acts. And here's the part that I think truly shows that it's Paul Bateson. And it wasn't just the sex or the money. I was looking for a soul connection.
Oh, right.
And I think that's how Paul Bateson rationalized to himself what he did. That he was looking for something that someone didn't give him. And so, I decided something, needed to be done. I hated the rejection and something needed to be done. So he says, I incapacitated him with the frying pan. I stabbed him in the heart with one of his own knives. I took cash, which was, a little over $50. I took his master charge, which is just the sweetest thing ever because that's what it was called in the 70s, was master charge. I took some clothes. I went to buy liquor and I was drunk pretty much for the entire next day. And I couldn't believe that I'd done what I did. Now, he continues to go on and says, I'm the son of an orchestra leader. I'm from Berlin, which, if you remember, Paul Bateson was in the military in Germany. I don't understand my homosexuality. I have an interest in the arts. I wanted to be a dancer when I was younger. Just keep these details in your mind. And then he said, I'd like to atone in some way, but I don't want to give myself up. I would never be able to practice again. I'd lose my license.
Oh, okay.
Now,
It just the clues just keep adding up.
yes. When Arthur Bell, the journalist, says, "What sort of license do you have?" hoping to identify him, he's like, "Yeah, I'm not going to tell you." So when Arthur Bell calls the NYPD and says, "Look, I was writing this down as fast as I could. He said they used Crisco. He knew about the stolen credit card. He hit him in the head with a frying pan and then he stabbed him. He said he stabbed him in the wrong part of the chest. I don't know what that means." Well, it means someone who probably has, medical acuity in some way.
Yeah.
So the police are like, "Okay, these are things we haven't released, and we bet you he's going to call you again." And I'll be darned if at 11 p.m. a few days later, Arthur Bell's phone didn't ring again. It wasn't the killer, but it was a man who described himself as Mitch, and he said, the killer's name is Paul Bateson. We were in AA together at St. Vincent's Hospital. He used a pseudonym of Johnny Johnson. "Hello, Mitch. It's AA, Alcoholics Anonymous." But, Johnny Johnson / Paul Bateson was an unemployed x-ray technician is what he called himself, even though he was a radiological technician. Pseudonym Mitch said, "I know he used this different name. We, dried out together, but he got drunk one night and called me and confessed to killing Addison Verrill."
But now Mitch just says his name is Mitch. He's not helping by actually identifying himself.
Exactly. And Mitch says, "I would like to meet you in person, Arthur Bell." And the police are like, no. And they show up at Paul Bateson's apartment on East 12th Street. And they're just like, "That's it. We're arresting him. You do not meet this guy. You don't go and meet this guy." And Paul Bateson is there drunk. And when the police come in and say, "Do you know why you're being arrested?" Paul Bateson points to a copy of the Village Voice, and it's open to Arthur Bell's article about Addison Verrill's murder.
Well, there you go.
So they did actually find Mitch. They found him at a bar. He said, "Yes, it was me. I'm the one that called. Yes, I'm drunk, but I wasn't drunk when he called me. And what he told me was this." And Paul Bateson eventually sits down and writes a confession out that's pretty similar, other than the details about, his biography, pretty similar to what he told Arthur Bell. So he's charged with second-degree murder, and it's like a month later, and he's at Rikers Prison, Rikers Island. And Arthur Bell said, I need to go talk to him. So he shows up and talks. They let him in. He gets to talk to Paul Bateson, and he basically just talks about his life, probably because his attorney said, "Don't say anything about what you did." He said being in jail was helping him get sober. Here's a couple other things he said. "The thing I regret most is that I'm going to miss the new season of the Joffrey Ballet."
Okay.
So, the person who called and confessed had wanted to be a dancer.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. But even Arthur Bell said, "You know what? He was intelligent and funny and attractive. And if I'd met him at a bar instead of at jail, I might have gone home with him too." He understood why Addison Verrill, and he were going to hook up. So when he is asked by Arthur Bell, "Look, will you admit to anything that you really told me?" He said, "I'm not guilty. I think I'm going to get past this. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to be hurt. But you know what? Then I'm just going to tear up my roots and I'll settle down someplace else." Which is exactly what he did after he spent his time not enough time.
Oh my! How much time did he serve?
Well, Judge Morris Goldman sentenced him to 20 years to life, which was actually 5 years less than the DA had asked for. The DA had wanted him to do 25 years to life. And he spent 24 years and 3 months in prison. And here's why this is so uncomfortable. He killed Addison Verrill, and that's what he was convicted on, even though he later on said, I was drunk when I wrote that confession, and I was never read my Miranda rights. But that really wasn't found to be true. And, his confession was actually admitted. The articles from the Village Voice from Arthur Bell were admitted to court. It's pretty interesting, quite frankly. But unfortunately, in the 70s, 6 corpses of men were found dismembered in bags floating in the Hudson River. And the part that is just cracking my heart in half, 6 gay men have never been identified. Like there's not a family member that comes forward and says, my family member has been missing. 6 men never identified.
And all killed the same way, all cut up the same way.
Dismembered in the same way. They were wearing clothing that would trace them to this Greenwich Village leather shop that catered to the gay community. Whoever cut them up had to, according to the police, have been a butcher or in the medical field because they had skill with using a knife. They were at one point known as the leather killings, as the bag killings, and as CUPPI, C-U-P-P-I, which stands for Circumstances Unknown Pending Police Investigation. 6 men. Circumstances unknown. They're cut up. They didn't cut themselves up. This is just, it breaks my heart in half that this, So on these bags where these parts of these men were found in the Hudson River, they were like small garbage bags. And at the bottom of the bag on the inside is very tiny lettering that says NYUMC Neuropsychiatric Unit.
Oh, for God's sake. On all of them.
Yep.
Every one of them.
All the bags are the same.
And nobody made the connection?
Oh, I think so. But it was unable to be proven. What is so interesting to me is that at the beginning of season 2 of Mindhunter, they're talking about a guy who cuts up gay men and puts them in bags and puts them in the river. And then Paul Bateson, the Paul Bateson character, is arrested, and Dr. Wendy goes to talk to him about murder and sex. That would be the part that she, would be interested in as a profiler. And Bill Tench and Holden Ford are like, this guy was arrested, but he killed a guy in his apartment. I don't, he didn't do anything like the guy who cut up people and put them in bags. So they are like, meh, not related. And Dr. Wendy goes and talks to the Paul Bateson character. And I have to say, this actor's name is Morgan Kelly. He was pretty effing perfect, because if you hear the dialogue from The Exorcist of Paul Bateson's lines, the way his cadence, the way he spoke so calmly to Linda Blair's character of Reagan, relating to a child having a difficult medical procedure. This actor, and it was a very small scene. It's apparently like 7 minutes. He's amazing. And he looks, I gotta say, Paul Bateson would be, if he were alive, and we don't really know, but we kind of know. If he were alive and saw it, he would be like, that guy, they did good. Because the guy is handsome and calm, and he's got more life in his eyes, because the pictures of Paul Bateson, he just looks very checked out. He probably looked more alive in the movie The Exorcist than he really was. Maybe it was, part of being an actor. even if he's not an actor. He's a, radiological technician, but his eyes were present. He was present in the moment on screen. But every picture after that of him, it's like, oh, you can see he's checked out. He's very checked out. But this actor in Mindhunter, portraying him, does a really great job. And he's very subtle. It's very subtle, but he does a phenomenal job of the Paul, we're going to call it the Paul Bateson character. Now, the entire time, Paul Bateson is saying, the prosecutor's calling me a psychopath. I'm not a psychopath. And it's fascinating that of all the things that he, I just think it's so amazing that he's like, I am not a psychopath. And that's the thing that he said to Arthur Bell in his article. Look, I like your writing. It's a great story. I'm not a psychopath.
Yeah, it kind of implies, yeah, I did all that stuff, but I am not a psychopath.
Yeah, I feel like it's just a part of him he cannot access. He can't admit to himself who he really is, or who he was, or, well, who he is. And he has always just kept denying the murders. He's like, this is gonna pass. I'm gonna get out and it's gonna be fine. So William Hoyt, the prosecutor, asked, the judge, look, we have his written confession. We have this witness who actually testified at the trial. His name is Richard Ryan, who is a really good friend of Paul Bateson's. And he said, he confessed to me. And the judge is like, you know what? These other 6 murders, they're too ephemeral. I'm not going to use any of this in consideration when sentencing him.
I'm trying to digest that.
I know. Too ephemeral. Well,
how is it ephemeral?
I don't get it. It's extraordinarily circumstantial. And yet all garbage bags have property of NYCMC neuropsychiatric unit. Whoever cut the bodies had medical knowledge or was a butcher. Medical knowledge. I mean, it's overwhelming. So, one day after his 63rd birthday in August of 2003, Paul Bateson is released on parole from the Arthur Kill Correctional Facility in Staten Island.
Well, that's great.
Mm-hmm. So there's a few online records that the Department of Corrections, keep. He had 5 years of parole. His parole was successfully completed in November of 2008. Now, there are a couple of people over the years who have tried to find him for different reasons. Some of them journalists, even William Friedkin, who I have to say, he's a bit of an oddball, right? He had gone to visit Paul Bateson in prison because he's like this quiet, kind young man who was wonderful on the set and did a great job. I can't believe that this is him. Well, while visiting Paul Bateson, he said, yeah, I know I killed that one guy, but I don't know what they're talking about with the others. Yeah, I cut him up and put him in bags and put him in the Hudson River.
Huh?
Not released. William Friedkin told no one until a 2018 interview.
What?
He's like, but he he confessed to you, because how would he know about the bags if he didn't do it? And Addison Verrill was found in his apartment. I know. William Friedkin is now literally on my shit list. He said, the last thing I heard, he was living somewhere in upstate New York. And this is also what bothers me, because I don't want Paul Bateson to be inspiration for anything, quite frankly. But William Friedkin decided to turn the book Cruisin' into a film after speaking with Paul Bateson.
Well, yeah.
Now, granted, Cruisin' was pretty roundly thrashed.
It was, but I don't really blame Friedkin. I mean, directors, these guys, they're all artists, and they're all thinking about their next, their next creative project, and I don't know if they really take a lot of morality into account when they're doing that. Now, that doesn't excuse him for not.
Yeah, he didn't say anything till 2018. He's being interviewed, and he's like, "Oh yeah," talking about kind of the curse of the Exorcist. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I talked to Paul Bateson in prison because he was such a sweet young man." And he said he remembered killing the one guy, but the others he didn't do. But that's how they got him, is because he put the guy's body in bags. What? No, he didn't. That's the other victims.
He's confusing his murders.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. He's confusing his murders in front of
William Friedkin, who doesn't tell anyone because he doesn't know the details on the murders. Maybe it's because he had wet brain. Maybe he was so much alcohol that he'd pickled his brain.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. You think Friedkin would have said something about that.
Right. So a journalist named Matt Miller writes a beautiful article in Esquire, and it's really well done. It was in October of 2018 is when it came out. It's huge. It has pictures and a lot of details that you can't always find other places. And Matt Miller is like, I want to know who did this to 6 men, and why was it never solved? Why was it pushed into the back of, the files? He, filled out a records request form and was told, anything from that era is, going to be really difficult to find, impossible at this point. If there's anything on an unidentified body from 75 to 77, good luck, buddy. This Matt Miller guy, I was like, yeah, I know how you feel, Matt. It's fun trying to fill out, try and get
FOIA requests.
Yeah. And especially I'm guessing if NYC is kind of difficult, I'm going to guess. But I feel that Paul Bateson fulfilled what he predicted after his indictment and conviction. Some people are going to be hurt. Feelings are going to be hurt. I'm going to pick up roots and start over. And I think that's what he did. And no one would know where he was. And there's a Social Security death index that shows that a Paul F. Bateson with the same birth date and Social Security number as the one for Paul F. Bateson issued in Pennsylvania died on September 15th, of 2012. I think he probably died alone. And
do you know where?
In upstate New York.
Oh, okay.
Which is where William Friedkin said he would be.
Yeah, right.
So Matt Miller, in his really well done feature in Esquire, trying to find out about the 6 men who've never been identified, who were probably murdered by Paul Bateson, said, maybe after reading this article, someone who knows something will call me. And I don't have a number for Matt Miller, but I bet if someone in the area of New York who is still around and knew Paul Bateson or any of the people that were missing, I bet if you called Esquire magazine and asked for Matt Miller, they would find him for you, because we know more than one person knows. And more cowbell.
And remember, you can also call us here at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837. And if you'd like to support the podcast, go to patreon.com/JustTheTipsters.